What's up, guys? It's your boy Rich here, back at it again. And let's talk about the risk of buying an expensive watch from a new brand. But then again, there's no guarantee that large companies will always be around, even the once mighty household names. Okay, the stage is set. And now what if we're ready to make our next expensive watch purchase? And it doesn't need to be Rolex expensive. It can be, say, $2,000. Because after all, we put a lot of consideration into that watch. And we rarely make an impulse purchase on a luxury watch. But what if one of our concerns is, will this watch company still be around down the road? Well, that's a legitimate concern. And as much as we desire an exclusive watch, we don't want that exclusivity to come at the expense of a failed watch after a year. So, if we use history as an indicator, let's consider the 20-year benchmark for a brand. Let's turn back the clock to the 1980s, where watches like Ebel, Concord, Baume Mercy, and Bertolucci reigned supreme. They carried a lot of cachet and were really prestigious. In fact, those brands were right under the Rolex and Omega category. But the 1980s was not a decade known for producing quality watches. It was an era known for greed and excess, and we bought into that. And speaking of greed, let's hear Michael Douglas deliver one of the all-time best lines in a movie ever. Here's Gordon Gekko.
Greed is right. Greed works.
We didn't have the internet or watch forums during the 1980s. No way of sharing our opinions or dissatisfaction with other watch enthusiasts. So we basically had to take whatever watches those companies were giving us. We certainly didn't have the choices we have today. So there was no one pushing those watch companies into making a better product and charging the money that they were charging. For example, Bertolucci was charging $10,000. So I used the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, to value that watch in today's dollars. And $10,000 back then would be a $32,000 watch today. No way that watch makes it as is today. Basically, those watch companies priced themselves out of the market. So as we left the 1980s and early 1990s, we also left those watch brands behind. And new watch brands were born as they learned from their predecessors. So let's take a look at the first watch brand meeting the 20-year benchmark and see if it has staying power. So to meet the 20-year benchmark, it means a watch company would have to have been born in 1998. So let's take a look at one of the original watches born around this time, and we're talking Nomos. Nomos was established in 1990, and they went the opposite direction from the watches we just talked about by introducing us to watches that were less expensive than those watches and using their own in-house movement. Yes, granted, their movements are not overly complicated, nor does Nomos have a particularly sporty lineup of watches. I think their most complicated watch is their World Time. So their movements don't need to be overly complicated, but what they are is reliable. And Nomos was not an overnight success. It took them a good 10 years to start to get recognized, and they clearly benefited from watch forms, which really started to take off around that time. I think it's reasonable to say that Nomos was firmly established a good 5, 6, or 7 years ago, right around the 20-year benchmark. Another watch company to just make the 20-year benchmark is Schaumburg watches. Schaumburg watches were established in 1998. They're not as well known as Nomos watches, but they are starting to gain momentum and starting to have a large presence at Baselworld. Their watches are priced, most of them, between $1,500 to $2,000, which is similarly priced to a lot of Nomos watches. My favorite lineup of watches is their Double Moon watch and their Steampunk. Their moon watches are some of the most stunning moon watches that I have ever seen, and they have won awards. Schaumburg watches don't charge us an arm and a leg, especially since they don't use in-house movements. A lot of their movements use Sellita movements, but by not gouging us with high prices, it gives Schaumburg watches a legit chance of making it, especially because of those designs. Schaumburg watches is also a German-made watch, and along with my preference for Nomos and Glashütte and now Schaumburg watches, I'm starting to wonder if I have any German ancestry in me. Memo to self: sign up for Ancestry.com. Let's talk about a third watch that's older than 20 years, and that's RGM. RGM was established in 1995, and they are an American-made watch company started by Roland Murphy. And Roland used to make or design watches for Hamilton watches back in the 1980s. And my favorite RGM watch is their baseball and chess themed watches. I love those lacquered dials. He makes some of I think I like almost every single one of his designs. It is a very niche market that he makes watches for, but they are thriving by not charging Lange prices for some fantastic designs. The company is now going on 23 years old and is not slowing down. They are continuing to make new lines up of watches, which is a really good indicator, and I'm starting to feel more comfortable if I was to ever make an RGM purchase. One watch company that is just a bit short of the 20-year benchmark, but is on the cusp of reaching it and is worth talking about is Bremont. Bremont was established in 2002. And while I didn't care about their green watch, there are some designs I really like. I really like their 1918 with that blue dial. I just can't take my eyes off of it. But as it stands, I give them maybe a 75% chance of making it. And what I mean is 75% chance of making it and being around for the next 20 years. Right now, we are asking a lot from Bremont. We are basically asking them to be one of the first watches to buck history. And what I mean by that is history always has a way of repeating itself. And right now they are headed on a collision course with the watches from the 1980s that were charging a lot and have failed. And while most of us don't care about in-house versus an ETA movement, for example, we do care about the prices. And I think Bremont has strayed too far from their original business model, which was high quality watches at reasonable prices. And while their quality is still there, I think their finishings are really top notch and some of their designs are just stunning. I think they are now getting to be too expensive. They are now encroaching Rolex prices and are now challenging the big boys, and that is going to be quite challenging for Bremont as is. I think Bremont needs to go in-house or at least use more of their proprietary parts in their movement and lower their prices. The next 4 or 5 years will be absolutely crucial to Bremont in determining if they're going to be around as a luxury watch. As it is, if they don't make any changes to their business model, my crystal ball suggests they are headed to a department store, which is a demotion for a luxury watch. They were once carried by a department store, Barney's, before taking themselves out because they wanted to be taken seriously as a real watch. Let's hope they're not headed back there. So we just talked about watch brands that have passed the 20-year benchmark or are nearing it. But I also thought it'd be noteworthy to talk about 3 brands that have passed the 5-year threshold because that's no small feat. It seems that 90% of the watches fail within the first 5 years. So let's talk about the first watch, which is Shinola. Shinola was established in 2011, and right off the bat, I will say I'm not a really big fan of Shinola. But if their watch business fails, they can also sell their bicycles and small leather goods, which is also what they're known for. But if they can continue, or as rumors suggest, make quality in-house movements, American in-house movements, and they don't change the prices of their watches because they're not crazily priced, especially if they go in-house, then I think Shinola has a legitimate chance of making it. The next brand is Tudor, and we all know Tudor is not a brand new company, but they have kind of sort of been reborn in 2013 with their all-new Black Bay using their first in-house movement. We might remember the last time Tudor attempted to have a US presence, they failed, and no watch company can have a chance of making it if they ignore the US market. The US market is just too important for any watch company. And Tudor is also headed in the right direction, and I really hope that Tudor makes it. There is no Tudor will always be around. They've never been dormant, even though they didn't have a US presence. They are also backed by Rolex, so it is probably the safest bet among these 3 watches that we're going to talk about as a watch company that will always make it and will be a safe bet and investment. Rolex has also done a magnificent job in positioning Tudor as their premier entry-level luxury sports watch in the $3,000 to $4,000 segment. The third watch is Weiss watches, and Weiss watches were established in 2013 by Cameron Weiss. And he had learned his training from Audemars Piguet and Vacheron. And I can't be entirely unbiased to Cameron because he's a really nice guy and a really humble guy. He attended our private watch society event, and he was a real joy to have a conversation with. He was just a really pleasant guy. His watches also are highly favored as an American watch, where it's received a lot of press support. But I wouldn't mind if Weiss watches added a chronograph or a diver's watch, meaning a more complicated sports watch type to his already nice collection of watches. I think that would go really well for Weiss watches. So while the moral of this episode is startups are risky for expensive watches, we shouldn't let that completely deter us if we are really attracted to a watch, especially if it uses an ETA movement, because we know we can have that watch serviced long after the company folds, if it folds. However, if we are interested in a watch using an in-house movement from a relatively unknown brand, maybe we should let that season a little while longer and learn about their customer service and what others are saying about them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you the next time. So the first watch is Shinola. So Shinola, they can always sell... So memo to self, sign up for... So, memo to self, sign up for...